we try to keep our entire life under control, we quietly build a prison around ourselves. Control feels safe. We plan, check, analyze every detail, hoping it will protect us from fear. But fear doesn't go away, it grows. Carl Jung wrote that the urge to control everything is the ego's reaction to a world it doesn't trust. The ego is terrified of chaos, because chaos reminds it of its own limits. Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to control everything, the worse things get? Jung believed the ego is only a small fragment of the psyche. It helps us navigate, but it was never meant to rule. When the ego takes the throne, we lose the connection to our deeper self, what Jung called the self. Life then turns into a struggle. We start fearing mistakes, losses, change. Any deviation from the plan feels like a threat, and that's when anxiety appears. Think of how many times you've tried to predict the future. We calculate scenarios, prepare for the worst, build backup plans, yet reality still surprises us. Why? Because life isn't an equation, it's full of unknowns. And within that uncertainty lies the potential for growth. Once we allow the unknown to exist, we stop fighting with ourselves. Control is not strength, it's fear in disguise. We fear losing respect, losing a job, losing someone we love. We fear pain, disappointment. But Jung wrote, "What you resist persists." When we squeeze life too tightly, everything freezes. Energy, movement, inspiration. We feel tired, irritable, empty. Not because the world is against us, but because we are exhausting ourselves from within. Look at everyday life. We even plan our rest. We rarely just exist. The phone, the news, notifications, constant distractions from being alone with ourselves. Yet silence is where we actually hear what's happening inside. Jung called this individuation, a return to one's own center. It isn't mysticism, it's emotional maturity. When a person stops micromanaging every step, they finally notice their true motives and desires. Think of children. They don't care about outcomes. They simply do. They don't fear losing control because they haven't built an adult ego yet. That contrast is striking. Adults want to control everything, while children simply live. Jung said, "Real maturity begins when we regain the ability to move with life without losing awareness." Control destroys spontaneity. We stop noticing signs, coincidences, little synchronicities that guide us forward. Jung believed synchronicity reveals a hidden order, but only when we allow life to flow. How many times have you forced things to happen and nothing worked? And then, when you finally let go, everything fell into place. That isn't luck. It's how the psyche works. When we loosen our grip, we don't lose power. We gain clarity. Control transforms into conscious participation. We stop acting like guards and become observers. We still act, but not out of fear. We allow life to reveal itself, and life responds. Jung believed that intuition is the voice of the self, quiet, but wiser than logic. The more we force things, the further we drift from it. The first step toward inner freedom is admitting that life isn't something we control. It's something we join. And when you understand that, anxiety loses its strength. Calmness appears, not because problems vanish, but because you stop strangling them. Maybe it's worth letting your day unfold without pressure, without expectations. Just observe what happens when you stop trying to control every moment. Anxiety is not the voice of reason. It's the voice of an ego afraid to disappear. Jung saw anxiety as the shadow of consciousness, appearing when inner balance is broken and we live from the head instead of from wholeness. We trick ourselves into thinking worry equals responsibility. But worry solves nothing. It only creates the illusion of doing something. How much time do we waste on mental arguments, imaginary conversations, scenarios that never come true. The ego loves noise because in silence it loses dominance. Anxiety is a performance where the ego plays the hero, the victim, the savior. It seeks attention, not solutions. And the more you listen to this inner chatter, the louder it becomes. The ego chases control because it cannot trust. It expects danger everywhere. Jung noted that the anxious person doesn't suffer from the world. They suffer from their interpretation of the world. When you look through fear, even peace feels suspicious. Thought becomes a trap. One anxious idea activates a chain of others, and imagination becomes a tool of self-torture. When you're anxious, the mind doesn't look for answers. It spins in circles. It's an engine running with no destination. Jung said neurosis is frozen energy, movement stuck inside the psyche. Anxiety is this stuck movement. Our body reacts as if danger is real: tight shoulders, shallow breathing, racing heart. The ego doesn't distinguish thoughts from reality. To heal anxiety, Jung believed you must see it, not suppress it. Simply watch it rise and fall. When you stop resisting, it runs out of fuel. The ego hates uncertainty. It wants guarantees, explanations, promises. But life owes us none. Anxiety is the refusal to accept that we cannot know the future. Accepting your limits is the beginning of wisdom. Jung described the observing self, the part of us that can watch the ego from the outside. That's the doorway to freedom. When you notice your anxiety without drowning in it, you stop being its prisoner. Ask yourself, what am I really afraid of? Losing control? Being rejected? Failing? Once fear is named, it weakens. Anxiety won't disappear instantly, but it stops making decisions for you. Behind anxiety lies energy wanting to transform. When you stop fighting, that energy returns as clarity. The ego says, fight. The self says, look. Those are two different voices. Which one do you listen to? When you differentiate them, the mind quiets. Most of your fears aren't yours. They're borrowed, learned, repeated like old recordings. When you stop identifying with anxiety, space appears. In that space, nothing needs to be forced. There is only breath, presence, and reality. That is where genuine inner work begins. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means stopping the fight against what already is. Jung wrote that tension appears when consciousness goes against the natural flow of the psyche. We try to control feelings, relationships, results, all to avoid uncertainty. Letting go starts with, I don't have to control everything. That isn't defeat, it's maturity. A drowning person sinks faster when they panic, but floats when they stop struggling. The psyche works the same way. As soon as we stop fighting, energy returns. Jung called this aligning with the inner order. Letting go is not passivity. It is action without violence. We act from calm, not fear. True power is moving in rhythm with the unconscious, letting intuition lead. Letting go is not losing yourself. It is losing the mask. The ego fears disappearance, but what disappears is the persona, not the real you. Think of a moment when things became easier the second you stopped forcing them. That was the inner shift. Letting go frees the energy that was trapped in tension. Solutions appear. The psyche naturally seeks balance when we stop interfering. It's scary to let go. We fear losing everything. But how much have we already lost trying to hold on to what needed to change? You can't keep what is meant to move. Life is motion. Hold too tightly, and you break what could have been saved. Jung taught that letting go returns us to our inner center, not to chaos. When fear stops directing our actions, we enter flow, a state where things unfold naturally. We stop dragging life and start moving with it. Maybe you're facing something now that you can't control. Ask yourself, do I really need to fight, or can I just witness? Sometimes life makes better decisions than we do. Letting go is a skill. First comes fear, then silence, then freedom. The unconscious is not an enemy, it's a guide. When we stop resisting, life begins to organize itself. People appear at the right time, decisions become obvious, events align. This isn't magic, it's inner coherence. Try letting go of something small today, a thought, an expectation, a tension. Simply allow it to be and see what happens. This is how we move from anxiety to trust. Most anxiety comes from protecting not reality, but an image of ourselves. Jung called it the persona, the mask we build to meet expectations. It helps us survive, but eventually becomes a prison. We begin to believe the mask is us, and we fear losing it because we think we'll have nothing left. How many roles do you play? Worker, friend, partner, parent. They matter, but none of them define you fully. Suffering begins when we identify with one role and reject the rest of who we are. We cling to an image of being strong, successful, needed, and hide everything that doesn't fit. And the more we hide, the more anxious we become. The shadow is everything we avoid: weakness, envy, fear, exhaustion. We try to be perfect, and the pressure builds. Life cannot be divided. Light and darkness coexist. Deny one, and the whole system collapses. Anxiety becomes constant. Trying to be perfect is exhausting. Every mistake feels fatal, every criticism personal. Not because the world is cruel, but because we've fused with a role. The persona becomes the whole identity, and the soul has no room. Ask yourself, who am I without roles, titles, achievements, responsibilities? If all of that vanished, would I still exist? The answer may scare you, but that fear is the doorway to authenticity. When we stop defending the illusion, real strength appears, not the strength of control, but of presence. Jung believed wholeness is born only when we accept all parts of ourselves, not just the appealing ones. When you accept yourself fully, the need to prove disappears. Approval loses importance. You become internally stable. People fear being themselves, thinking they'll lose love or respect. But respect, built on a mask, is temporary. Real closeness begins where honesty begins, even in vulnerability. When you stop hiding, anxiety has no job left to do. It existed only to protect the mask. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Terrifying, because it destroys illusions. But after the fear comes peace. You stop acting. You allow yourself to be imperfect. And then you finally hear the inner voice that was buried under noise. What would happen if you allowed yourself to be real, with no need to impress, no fear of judgment? You'd feel lighter. The energy used to maintain the persona would return to living. Jung believed wholeness is born not from perfection, but from sincerity. When the mask falls, you remain alive, imperfect, and real. And only this real self can love, create, and connect deeply. Being yourself isn't weakness, it's the highest form of maturity. It's the path where anxiety turns into clarity, and the pursuit of perfection becomes calm confidence. When you stop clinging, life begins to move on its own. Jung believed each of us has an inner center, the self, a deeper order that knows the path better than the ego. When the ego is noisy, life feels chaotic. When it quiets, things align, patterns appear, synchronicities emerge. People and opportunities arrive at the right moment, not miracles, but the psyche working as intended. Anxiety distorts perception, like waves rippling across water. Calm the waves, and the reflection becomes clear. When the mind quiets, clarity appears. Answers come not through effort, but through presence. Harmony, Jung believed, happens when ego and self cooperate. The ego acts, the self guides. We continue to live, work, love, but without fear, without proving anything. We begin trusting the process, not the outcome. Life stops feeling like an enemy and becomes an ally. Have you noticed that your best ideas come when you're relaxed, not stressed? When you release expectations, inspiration comes. When you stop clinging to the result, new possibilities open. This is flow, movement without force, attention without fear. The truth is simple. You cannot control a river. You can only learn to move with it. The more you try to grab the water, the faster it slips away. But when you let it flow, it carries you where you need to be. Life doesn't require struggle. It requires participation. Jung taught that maturity begins when we stop confusing control with safety. Safety isn't in predicting the future. It's in trusting the moment. When that happens, anxiety loses its purpose. We stop battling the current and begin feeling its rhythm. Trust may look like risk, but it's actually returning home, to yourself, to life, to an inner order that has always been there. All that's needed is to stop interfering. Life doesn't need our constant supervision to be wise. It knows the way. When you stop resisting, it reveals its direction. And then you realize everything falls into place, not when you plan everything perfectly, but when you allow life to simply unfold. Thank you for watching. I hope this gave you something to reflect on. Until next time.